The sun barely crested the rolling hills of Franklin, Tennessee, on March 12, 2025, casting a pale golden glow over the quiet streets of Maple Lane. The air was crisp with the scent of blooming dogwoods. A serene backdrop to the Carter family home, a single-story ranch with weathered brick and a sagging front porch adorned with an American flag that fluttered lazily in the morning breeze. Inside, however, peace was a distant memory, shattered by the ceaseless barking of Shadow, a German shepherd whose black and tan coat rippled with tension as he stood guard beside the polished oak coffin of Captain Nathan Carter. The dog's amber eyes burned with an intensity that seemed almost human, his barks echoing through the house like a siren no one could silence, a desperate plea that had begun the moment the casket was delivered under the cover of night and had only grown louder. More insistent, as dawn broke over the sleepy suburb. Ellen Carter stood in the living room, her trembling hands clutching a mug of coffee that had long gone cold, her auburn hair, once vibrant, now streaked with gray, falling in unkempt strands around her pale, tear-streaked face. At 56, she bore the weight of a lifetime of loss, her green eyes hollowed by sleepless nights and a grief that had become her constant companion. She stared at Shadow, her son Nathan's inseparable partner for the past 6 years, and whispered, "He hasn't stopped, Ethan, not since they brought him home." Her voice cracked. Fragile as the porcelain mug she gripped, as if saying it aloud might unravel her entirely. Nathan, a decorated Army Special Forces captain, had reportedly died in a classified operation just 5 days earlier. His body returned to Franklin in a sealed casket with little explanation beyond the official line, a tragic training accident overseas. But Shadow's relentless barking told a different story. One Ellen couldn't ignore, no matter how much her heart ached to believe her son was truly gone. Ethan Marshall, Nathan's oldest friend and a former detective with the Nashville Police Department, leaned against the living room window, his broad shoulders tense beneath a faded leather jacket, his dark hair mussed from running his hands through it in frustration. At 35, Ethan's rugged features, sharp jawline, hazel eyes that missed nothing, carried the weariness of a man who'd seen too much, yet his southern drawl retained a quiet resolve as he said, "Ellen, this ain't just a dog grieving. Shadow's military-trained, K-9 elite. He's alerting us to something wrong, something big." He turned from the window, where he'd been watching the street for any sign of the unmarked SUVs that had lingered on Maple Lane since Nathan's coffin arrived, and crossed the room to kneel beside Shadow. The German shepherd's barks softened to a low, guttural growl as Ethan ran a hand over his fur, feeling the coiled energy beneath. "He's trying to tell us Nathan's not in there," Ethan said, his voice steady but laced with a growing certainty that sent a chill racing down Ellen's spine. The Carter home was a relic of Franklin's quieter days. A town of 85,000 nestled 30 miles south of Nashville, where history clung to the brick storefronts of Main Street and the scars of the Civil War still marked the fields beyond the subdivisions. Maple Lane was a postcard of suburban life, tidy lawns, kids' bikes abandoned on driveways, neighbors who waved over picket fences, until the opioid crisis crept in, shuttering mills and leaving families like the Carters to lean on military service as a lifeline. Ellen's husband, Major Robert Carter, had been Franklin's pride, a special forces officer who vanished in 2003 during a covert mission in Afghanistan, his death chalked up to a helicopter crash with no body recovered. Only an empty casket buried under a hero's headstone. Ellen had raised Nathan alone after that, pouring her love into a boy who grew up idolizing his father, following his path into the army with a quiet determination that mirrored Robert's own. Now, at 32, Nathan was gone too, or so the army claimed, and the parallels to Robert's loss gnawed at Ellen's soul like a wound reopened. Nathan had been a force, 6'3". With his father's broad build and his mother's piercing green eyes, a soldier who carried himself with the calm authority of a man born for duty. He'd joined Special Forces after West Point. Paired with Shadow 6 years ago when the dog proved himself a prodigy in K-9 training, fearless, sharp, able to sniff out explosives or track a target across miles of unforgiving terrain. Together, they'd become legends in their unit, a symbiotic team Ellen glimpsed only through Nathan's rare, guarded letters home: "Shadow saved my ass again, Mom," or "He's more human than half the guys here." But last week, that bond had been severed, or so she'd been told, when General Samuel Grayson, Nathan's commanding officer, appeared on her doorstep, his silver hair gleaming under the porch light. His weathered face etched with what seemed like genuine sorrow. "Nathan died in a training exercise," Ellen, Grayson had said, removing his cap, his deep voice cracking just enough to sell the lie. Quick, painless, a hero to the end. Beside him stood a chaplain, silent and stiff, as if reciting a script he'd performed too many times. The army moved fast, too fast. They'd insisted on a closed casket, claiming Nathan's injuries were too severe for an open viewing, a decision Grayson reinforced with a firm hand on her shoulder. "It's better this way, Ellen. Remember him as he was." She'd begged to see her son, to touch his face one last time, but Grayson's refusal was unyielding, his staff ushering her through a blur of funeral plans with military precision. The coffin arrived at midnight, delivered by Colonel David Ramsey, Nathan's direct superior, a lean, cold-eyed man in his 40s whose clipped orders to the pallbearers felt more like a cover-up than a ceremony. Ellen had watched, numb, as they placed it in her living room, the oak gleaming under the soft glow of a lamp, a stark contrast to the chaos Shadow unleashed the moment they left. Ethan had been there through it all, a fixture in the Carter family since he and Nathan were kids racing dirt bikes down Maple Lane. A former cop turned private investigator after a corruption scandal ended his badge. Ethan had sworn to look after Ellen when Robert vanished, a promise sealed over backyard barbecues, late-night talks with Nathan about their dads, and a shared grief that bound them tighter than blood. Now, he couldn't shake the unease that had settled in his gut since Grayson's visit, the general's evasive answers, Ramsey's hovering presence, the unmarked vehicles that lingered just out of sight. He'd seen K9s like Shadow in action during his police days, dogs trained to detect lies, danger, death, and this wasn't morning. Shadow's barks were an alert, a warning, and Ethan's instincts screamed that Nathan's death was a lie. Franklin had always been a military town, its pride woven into the fabric of its people, sons and daughters who enlisted, families who flew gold star flags with quiet dignity. Robert Carter had been a local hero, his disappearance a wound the town never fully healed. Nathan's death, or supposed death, stirred that pain anew, whispers rippling through the coffee shops and churches, another Carter lost to duty. Ellen kept the house as a shrine to her men, Robert's medals framed above the fireplace, Nathan's West Point diploma on the wall, photos of Shadow at his side lining the halls. She'd been a schoolteacher once, before Robert's loss turned her into a widow who lived for her son's rare visits, his letters, his voice on the phone. That voice had been tense 3 nights before his death. Crackling through a bad connection, "Mom, if anything happens, trust Shadow, he knows more than they'll tell you." The call cut off, leaving her with a chill she couldn't shake. The funeral was set for that afternoon, a military affair Grayson had orchestrated with unsettling speed, flowers ordered, program printed, a guard of honor scheduled. But Shadow's behavior unraveled the script. When Ramsey arrived that morning to finalize details, the dog lunged, teeth bared, forcing the colonel to stumble back, his cool facade cracking. "Get that damn mutt under control," Ramsey snapped. But Ellen refused, her hands tightening around a crumpled note she'd found in Nathan's duffel 2 days ago. "Trust Shadow. He sees what they hide." She'd shown it to Ethan the night before. Her voice trembling as she said, "He trained him for something, danger, maybe. What if Nathan's not dead?" Ethan had spent the night digging, calling old cop contacts, piecing together rumors of special forces ops gone dark. Now, as Shadow scratched at the coffin's lid, claws gouging the wood, Ethan's resolve hardened. "We're opening it, Ellen," he said, stepping to the casket, his fingers brushing the cold brass latches. If Nathan's in there, we'll know. If he's not. He didn't finish, but the implication hung heavy. Nathan alive, a conspiracy at play. Ellen's breath hitched, her grief warring with a flicker of hope she barely dared to feel. "Do it," she said, voice breaking as she knelt beside Shadow, holding his collar. The dog fell silent, watching with eerie focus as Ethan worked the latches, the clicks loud in the hushed room. The morning sun streamed through lace curtains, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor as the lid creaked open, revealing a pristine silk lining, undisturbed, empty. No body. No uniform, nothing but a folded scrap of paper tucked into the corner, Nathan's handwriting stark against the white. "They lied about Dad. They're lying now." Ellen gasped, her legs buckling as she sank to the floor. Shadow pressing against her, whining softly. "Empty." She choked, her mind spiraling back to Robert's funeral, closed casket, rushed burial, no goodbye. Just like Robert's. Ethan snatched the note, his pulse racing as he read it aloud, the words igniting a fire in his chest. "They faked it, both of them," he said, his voice hard with certainty. "Nathan's alive, and someone's covering it up." Outside, tires squealed, a black SUV peeling away from the curb, vanishing into the mist that clung to Maple Lane. Shadow's growl deepened. Ears pinned back, his body coiled like a spring. "They've been watching," Ethan muttered, scanning the street through the window, his hand instinctively brushing the Glock holstered under his jacket. "Ellen, grab your coat, we're not safe here." She stumbled to her feet, clutching Nathan's note in a locked steel box Shadow had dragged from under his bed days earlier, its surface scratched as if the dog had been trying to claw it open. "What's happening, Ethan?" she whispered, her voice a mix of terror and dawning realization. "Someone wants us to think Nathan's dead," he said, yanking her toward the back door as footsteps thudded on the porch, General Grayson's voice booming. "Ellen, open up, we need to talk." Shadow darted ahead, his stealth a soldier's precision, guiding them to the garage. "My car's ready," Ethan said, shoving a duffel from his trunk into her arms. "Nathan told me last month, emergency kit." He knew this was coming. Ellen's hands shook as she gripped the box, her mind racing. Robert's coffin was empty too, Grayson was there then. Just like now. "They're connected, my husband, my son." Her voice steadied, a mother's fury rising through her grief. "We're finding them." Engines roared closer as Grayson's men breached the front door. Their shouts muffled by the walls. Ethan floored the Bronco out of the alley, Shadow in the back seat, his barks replaced by a vigilant silence. Franklin's quiet streets blurred past. The town's idyllic facade cracking under the weight of a conspiracy that had claimed 2 Carters, and the dog whose cry refused to let it stay buried. Ethan Marshall's Ford Bronco tore through the backroads of Franklin, Tennessee, gravel spitting under the tires as the early morning mist thickened around them. Shadow sat in the back seat, his German Shepherd frame rigid, amber eyes scanning the road behind. A low growl rumbling in his throat whenever headlights flickered in the distance. Ellen Carter clutched the steel box and Nathan's note. "They lied about Dad. They're lying now," her fingers tracing the scratched metal as her mind churned. Piecing together a puzzle that spanned 22 years. The empty coffin in her living room, Shadow's relentless barking, the black SUV fleeing Maple Lane, it was a mirror of her husband Robert's disappearance in 2003. A wound she'd buried under years of grief now torn open with a brutal, impossible hope. Nathan was alive, and so was Robert. "Grayson's behind this," Ethan said, his southern drawl tight with anger as he swerved onto a dirt path. The Bronco's shocks groaning. "He's been playing us, showing up with tears, rushing the funeral." That bastard knew Nathan wasn't dead. His hazel eyes flicked to the rearview. Watching for tails, his right hand resting near the Glock holstered under his jacket. "We're heading to Nathan's storage unit," Unit 312, edge of town. He gave me the key 2 weeks ago. Said if he didn't make it back, bring you there. Ellen's breath hitched, her green eyes narrowing as her teacher's calm gave way to a mother's resolve. He planned this, Shadow. The note, all of it. He knew they'd come for him, just like they did for Robert. She glanced at the dog, his ears perked, his silence now a soldier's focus, and felt a surge of pride mingled with fear. What's in the box, Ethan? What's he trying to tell us? We'll find out, Ethan said, pulling into the shadow of Franklin's storage, a sprawling lot of rusted units surrounded by overgrown weeds and sagging chain link. The town's outskirts were a graveyard of forgotten industry, shuttered mills, abandoned lots, but Nathan had chosen this spot for its anonymity, renting under an alias Ethan had traced through a PI contact. They slipped from the Bronco, Shadow leaping out, his nose to the ground as he led them to Unit 312, a battered steel door half hidden by a tarp. Ethan worked the key, the lock grinding open. And they stepped into a space that stopped Ellen cold, a makeshift command center, walls plastered with maps, photos, and documents linked by red yarn, a testament to Nathan's obsession. Holy hell, Ethan muttered, his boots scuffing the concrete as he took it in. A desk held a laptop, its screen dark, while a corkboard pinned a photo of Major Robert Carter, Ellen's husband. Nathan's father, circled in red, surrounded by clippings of his 2003 crash. Ellen unlocked the steel box with a key from Nathan's duffel, her hands trembling as she lifted the lid. Inside, a USB drive and a letter in Nathan's neat scrawl. Mom, if you're here, they've killed me like they did Dad. We're alive, fighting a shadow war. Trust Shadow, he'll guide you. The drive has proof, Nightshade's real. Love, Nate. Ellen sank to her knees, the letter slipping from her fingers as tears streamed down her face. Alive. She whispered. Her voice breaking as Shadow pressed against her, whining softly, his warmth grounding her spiraling mind. Ethan scooped up the letter, reading it aloud, then plugged the USB into the laptop. Files exploded across the screen, classified mission logs, financial trails, grainy photos of men in uniform meeting shadowy figures in backrooms. Operation Nightshade, Ethan said. Voice low and hard. A rogue unit inside the army, selling intel, staging accidents to silence threats. Robert uncovered it in 03, Nathan in 25. Ellen pulled herself up. Tracing a document on the wall, Major Robert Carter, flagged as disruptive, neutralized via staged helicopter crash, no remains. They faked his death to bury what he found. She said, her voice steadying as her old analytical mind kicked in, a skill honed from years of grading papers and spotting patterns in chaos. Nathan must have dug into the same mess. Grayson and Ramsey knew he was close. She scanned the files, names recurring, General Samuel Grayson, Colonel David Ramsey, a network spanning decades, profiting off war and betrayal. Ethan pointed to a photo, Grayson shaking hands with a suited man in a dark alley. Timestamped 2002. Grayson was Robert's CO, mentored Nathan. He's Nightshade's puppet master. Another file listed Ramsey as Nathan's handler, his signature on the training accident report. They staged it all, Robert's crash, Nathan's death. Shadow knew Nathan wasn't in that coffin. Headlights swept the lot, tires crunching gravel as Shadow's growl deepened, his hackles rising. They tracked us, Ethan hissed, slamming the laptop shut and shoving it into the duffel. He yanked Ellen behind a stack of crates, Shadow crouching beside them, his training switching to stealth mode, silent. Deadly. A black SUV rolled up, disgorging Ramsey and 3 armed men in tactical gear, their voices sharp in the dawn air. Carter's widows got the box, Ramsey barked into a radio. His cold blue eyes scanning the unit. Find her, end this. Ellen's heart pounded, but Shadow stayed still, his amber eyes locked on Ramsey, awaiting Ethan's command. "We need to get this to Anderson," Ethan whispered, his breath hot against her ear. Major General Patricia Anderson, Grayson's rival at Fort Campbell, had clashed with him over lost missions. Nathan's files marked her clean. Robert's ally. "She's our shot to blow this open." Ramsey's men fanned out, rifles glinting as they kicked open crates. Ethan mouthed, "Now," and Shadow sprang, a 95-pound blur of muscle and fury, slamming into Ramsey's legs, toppling him with a howl. Ethan tackled a second man, wrenching his rifle free and cracking his jaw with the stock, while Ellen swung the steel box, smashing a third's hand, her scream raw, "For my family." The fourth raised his weapon. But Shadow pivoted, jaws clamping his arm, dragging him down. Ramsey scrambled up, blood streaking his face, radio crackling. "Grayson, they're here, send backup." Ethan zip-tied his wrists. Snarling, "Where's Nathan, you son of a bitch?" Ramsey spat blood, grinning. "Dead by sundown, both Carters." Headlights flared, 2 more SUVs roaring in, gunfire peppering the unit. Ethan dragged Ellen and Shadow to the Bronco, bullets pinging the chassis as he floored it, tires screaming on asphalt. "Anderson's estate, 40 miles, he said, weaving through back roads. "She'll know what to do." Ellen clutched the drive, replaying Nathan's last call. "Trust Shadow, he knows more than they'll tell you." "He trained him to find me," she said, stroking Shadow's fur. "Blood matting his flank from a graze. To lead us to the truth." The Bronco hit pavement, Franklin's lights fading as pursuit closed in, engines roaring like hounds on a scent. Anderson's estate loomed, a gated fortress near Fort Campbell, guarded by MPs who waved them through when Ethan flashed his PI badge, shouting, "Carter case, life or death." Patricia Anderson met them in a wood-paneled study, 60. Steel gray hair cropped short, brown eyes like flint, her uniform crisp despite the hour. "Ellen," she said, voice low and steady. "Robert warned me this might happen, Nightshade's real." Ethan loaded the drive, files spilling out, Nightshade's web, Grayson, Ramsey, a shadow unit selling secrets, staging deaths. "Robert found it in 03, Anderson said, grim. "Sent me fragments before they took him." Grayson faked his crash to silence him. "Nathan must have hit the same vein." She pulled a photo, Robert and Nathan, recent, faces shadowed. "Alive. Robert reached me last year, underground, building a case." Nathan joined him. Grayson moved fast to stop them. Ellen's voice hardened. "Where are they?" "Safe, for now," Anderson said, handing her a burner phone. "Robert's line, call it." Ellen dialed, her pulse hammering. A rough voice answered, "Ellen?" "Robert," she gasped, tears spilling. "You're alive?" "Yes, and Nathan's here." "Nightshade's crumbling, you've got the drive?" "Got it," she said, Shadow pressing against her, whining. "Where?" "Old Sawmill. 15 miles north, meet us." "Bring Anderson." The line cut. Ethan grabbed the keys. "Let's move." Glass shattered downstairs, Grayson's voice booming, "Give me the drive. Or this house burns." Shadow lunged for the door, teeth bared, as Ellen gripped the box, her family's survival hanging by a thread. Anderson hit a panic button, "Hold them off." And the fight for truth erupted. General Samuel Grayson stormed into Patricia Anderson's study, his silver hair catching the chandelier's glow, a Beretta in his blood-streaked hand, Shadow's bite still oozing red. 8 Nightshade operatives flanked him, black tactical gear stark against the oak walls, rifles trained on Ellen Carter, Ethan Marshall, and Anderson. Shadow growled, his German shepherd frame coiled. Amber eyes locked on Grayson as Ellen clutched the USB drive, her other hand gripping the steel box like a lifeline. Ethan's Glock steadied beside Anderson, whose flinty brown eyes held a soldier's calm despite the chaos. "It's over, Sam," Anderson said, voice cutting through the tension. "Your empire's dust." Grayson's scarred face twisted into a sneer, his deep voice dripping with venom. 22 years, Robert couldn't stop me. Nathan couldn't, and you won't. That drive's mine, Ellen, or I finish your family for good. He raised the Beretta, but Shadow exploded into action, jaws snapping Grayson's wrist. The gun skidding across the hardwood. Ethan fired, 2 shots dropping an operative mid-step, while Anderson tackled another, her 60-year-old frame slamming him down with precision honed from decades in uniform. Ellen swung the steel box, cracking a third man's knee, her scream a primal roar, "For my boys." Grayson roared, shoving Shadow off, blood streaming as the dog yelped, a fresh graze slicing his flank. "Kill them," he bellowed, but sirens wailed outside, Anderson's Fort Campbell MPs storming the estate, joined by FBI TAC teams in black vans. Nightshade operatives faltered, pinned as agents breached the doors. Shouting, weapons down. Grayson spun, wild-eyed, cornered as his men dropped rifles, hands raised. Ethan tackled him, zip-tying his wrists, snarling, "Where's Nathan?" Grayson spat. "Dead soon, both Carters." Ellen loomed over him, drive in hand, voice steel. "You faked Robert's death, Nathan's too." "Why?" Grayson's grin was feral. "They threatened billions, intel sales, war contracts. Robert dug into Nightshade in 03, Nathan followed. Faking deaths kept them quiet, until that damn dog barked." Anderson cuffed him, grim. "FBI's rolling up your network, Ramsey's singing already." Agents hauled Grayson out, his glare a promise of vengeance cut short. Ellen sank beside Shadow, stroking his fur as he licked her hand, tail thumping despite the blood matting his coat. "Where are they?" she demanded, turning to Anderson, who handed her the burner phone. "Robert's line, call." Ellen dialed, heart hammering. "Ellen?" Robert's voice, rough, alive, crackled through. "Robert," she choked, tears spilling. "You're alive, and Nathan's with me. Nightshade's done, you've got the drive?" "Yes," she said, Shadow whining softly. "Where?" "Old Sawmill, 15 miles north, meet us. Bring Anderson." The line died. Ethan helped her up, Shadow limping but resolute. "Let's go," he said, Bronco keys jangling. The sawmill rose from the mist along the Cumberland River. A decaying hulk of rusted beams and shattered windows, its silhouette stark against the dawn. Shadow barked, racing ahead as Robert Carter emerged, 59, gray hair thinning. But his green eyes unmistakably Nathan's, alive with a fire Ellen hadn't seen in 22 years. Beside him stood Nathan, 32, bruised but whole, his captain's bearing intact despite the shadows under his eyes. Ellen ran, collapsing into Robert's arms, sobbing, "You're here." "I'm sorry, Elle," he whispered, holding her tight, his voice thick with regret. Nathan joined, wrapping them both as Shadow leapt between. Tail a blur. "Mom," Nathan said, breaking. "We had to, they'd have killed you." Ellen pulled back, anger flaring through her tears. "You let me grieve, both of you. 22 years. Robert, 5 days, Nathan." Robert handed her a leather journal, its pages worn. "Every day I wrote, watching you, Nathan's milestones. I couldn't risk Nightshade finding you." Nathan nodded. "I found Dad 2 years ago, tracked Nightshade through old files. We faked my death to finish it, Shadow was my failsafe to get you the truth." Ethan flipped through the journal, letters of love. Coded clues, sketches of Franklin from a distance. "You built this underground?" "Grayson ran Nightshade," Robert said. "Staged my crash, Nathan's accident, profit over honor. We gathered proof, names, deals, enough to bury them. Anderson arrived, her MPs securing the mill. FBI's got Grayson and Ramsey, but Lydia Pierce, his aide, bolted with agent lists. Robert paled. Pierce, she tipped me off in '03, then vanished. Double agent. Nathan checked his watch. She's at a private airstrip, 6 miles west. If she flies, agents die. Ellen grabbed Robert's arm. We're not splitting, I'm in. Nathan grinned. Mom's the brains, always was. At the airstrip, Lydia Pierce, 47, sharp-featured, loaded a Cessna. A flash drive in hand, her blonde hair whipping in the wind. Shadow growled as the Carters crept closer, Ethan flanking with Anderson's pistol. Lydia. Ellen called, stepping into the open. You helped Robert, why betray us? Lydia froze, gun drawn. Grayson killed my sister, Nightshade's first accident. I played both sides for revenge. You'll kill more families. Ellen said, advancing. Like mine. Shadow lunged, disarming her as Nathan tackled her down, Robert securing the drive. Ellen cuffed Lydia with Ethan's ties, breathless. It's over. Back at the Carter home, lasagna steamed on the kitchen table, Ellen's recipe, a tradition reborn. Shadow rested, bandaged, his mission complete. Robert read from his journal, October '03, I died to save you. Hardest day was watching you bury an empty box. Nathan added, I met Dad yearly, birthdays, secret. Kept you safe. Ellen held a photo, Nathan at 9, Robert in shadow. We were never broken, she said, smiling. Just waiting. A year later, Grayson and Pierce faced life sentences, Nightshade dismantled. The Carters renewed vows in their yard. Shadow flower collared, Franklin cheering. Ellen vowed, together, always. Robert echoed, no more shadows. Nathan grinned, and lasagna Sundays. Shadow barked, guarding a family healed by his cry, a bark that rewrote their history. Proving love could outlast lies. Lesson from the story. Sometimes the loudest truths come from the quietest fighters. Shadow's non-stop barking didn't just crack open an empty coffin, it shattered a web of lies that spanned decades. Proving that loyalty and instinct can outmatch even the darkest conspiracies. This story shows us that resilience isn't about avoiding pain, but about standing firm through it, whether it's a dog refusing to let go of his soldier or a family clawing their way back from betrayal. It's a reminder that the bonds we trust, even when tested by silence and loss, can light the way to justice and reunion. What about you? Has a pet or a loved one ever fought to reveal a truth you couldn't see? Share your experiences in the comments, we want to hear every detail. If Shadow's howl and the Carters' comeback got your heart racing, hit that like button, subscribe, and tap the bell so you don't miss our next epic story. Let us know where you're watching from and what kind of unbreakable bond you'd love to see us explore next. Let's keep digging for the truth together.